Hi guys, it's Luke here. Now today I want to introduce you to Brian. Like myself, he's a dad. And last year he was stuck in that cycle that so many of us know, drinking to unwind and showing up for his family a fraction of the man that he wanted to be. After many attempts to stay sober using willpower and trying to moderate, he reached out to me. After working with me earlier this year, the transformation has been incredible, not just to his drinking, but to who he is as a dad and as a man are something else. And he's agreed to come on today and share his story. And I really believe that if you're sitting there thinking that it isn't possible for you, what he's going to say today is going to prove that change is possible for all of us. Thanks for coming on today, Brian.
Thanks for having me, Luke. Great to catch up again.
No worries, buddy. So, how many days are you sober now?
115. Very happy to
Wow.
say. I honestly thought at one point I wouldn't get here. But really, really happy.
Perfect. Okay. So, before we started working together, what did a typical day look like around drinking? Paint me a picture, please.
Um, Fairly stuck in a loop. You know, uh, Typically I was drinking 3 or 4 days a week, maybe five, six, seven. You never know. But 9 times out of 10, I'd wake up fairly woeful. If I start from the morning time, I'd wake up fairly woeful. Regret everything I did the night before. Chances are, weekends I just wasn't able for the kids' activities. You'd be secretly hoping and praying. My wife would jump in and go, "Ah, look, I'll bring them." Um, and sometimes she would, which was great. But other than that, you're just kind of struggling through the day. You're not being there the way you should or the way you want, and you're beating yourself up all day. You're really, really hating on yourself, or I was. And then the time would come, and you're like, do you know what? I'm actually not too bad. You'd be talking yourself out of it, thinking, do you know what? Just do it tonight now, and you'll be grand. You know, you've said to yourself before, you can control it. Just have one more night now, and you'll be grand. So like that, that'd be your typical Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Sunday night drinking would happen, whereby then your work is affected the next day. Now thankfully I'm office based, so I don't rely on transport, on my own private transport. So in my mind, I'm thinking there's no danger of driving because I get public transport or I work from home. But regardless of that side of things, the productivity in work is shot down for the day. Um, Probably more so because you're at home. You're thinking, I'll just take 5 minutes. I'll just take 5 minutes. Sure, no one's around. The boss isn't around you. Yeah, it's a constant feedback loop. Then you struggle through the week. You might take 2 or 3 days, 4 days off during the week from drinking. Then Friday comes around, you're thinking, sure, look, you went 3 or 4 days, aren't you great? You don't have an issue. Like, sure, it's Friday. Let's go. So that was pretty much it. Yeah. That was my typical kind of day by day, week by week, in the lead up to reaching out to yourself.
So, when you were feeling bad, when you were hungover, you had plenty of guilt and shame. And then as that started to wear off, you would always talk yourself back into saying, I'm fine. I can deal with it. I'm fine. I'm going to have another drink. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like there was times where, like, the closest thing to depression that I could find myself in was the day after drinking. I'd beat myself up something fierce. I'd voice note, ring or text my wife and tell her how I was feeling, and she could feel it. She sensed it. There'd be times where she'd say, "Right, that's it, you're done. No more, no more." And then a bit of time would go by, either that day or a few days would go by, and I'd be convincing myself out loud and convincing her, like, actually, I'll cop. It's not that the drinking is the issue. I need to cop onto myself that it's okay to have a drink. Once I'm doing this, once I'm doing that. But then you're caught in that loop again, I'll just buy four, I'll just buy six. And next thing you know, there's a sale on for 10. Actually, that'll do me for 2 days. But then that's the one night gone. You know what I mean? I think I've never been diagnosed with it, but I, especially in the lead up to reaching out to you, it's the closest to depression I've ever felt, where I use the words hate when I refer to myself. I hated myself. And yeah, look, my wife plenty of times would say, listen, I think you need to stop. It was more so that it was a lot of house drinking I do, but it was more so she hated seeing how I was with myself. Um, for someone to say they hate themselves, it was pretty hard for her to hear.
How was it actually affecting you being a dad then, Brian? Not in general, like specifically. What moments stick out? You've already mentioned activities with the kids on the weekends
Yeah,
and stuff. Was there anything else it was affecting as a parent?
yeah. I think you've got that. When you're bringing when information is coming into you from any way, shape, or form, be it phone, life, text, or your interaction with your kids, we all have a filter of some sort, and a way of processing good, bad, or indifferent interactions with the kids. But I found that my interaction with them, my ability to be calm in a difficult situation with them, or any kind of bad situation, I felt, and I caught myself once or twice that fuse just got smaller and smaller and smaller. I remember one time we are bringing the shopping in from from the boot of the car, and I couldn't tell you what my son said or done. I know deep down it was very little, but I knew in the second I had this kind of grip behind my teeth. I was annoyed at him, and I let him know I was annoyed. When in actual fact he didn't do a whole lot. Do you know what I mean? Any other 14-year-old child with a father who wasn't impaired by drink would not have reacted the way I did. Now it wasn't. It was just kind of a gritted behind the teeth kind of reaction, like probably a course thrown in there as well, which I'm obviously deeply ashamed of. So then that kind of sets your tone then for the rest of the evening, or the day or the coming days, um. But definitely, like in terms of the children, it's probably more so since I stopped that I noticed that in the kitchen when you're cooking or you're preparing something or whatever, I find I just do silly dances, and it's something I've always done. But it's only now that I'm back doing them silly dances that I'm like, you weren't doing them for a while. Do you know what I mean? And things like that. And, you know, yeah, Daddy, can you flip me upside down? And these sort of things, and you're like, yeah, of course I will. Come here. Whereas before, I definitely know I wasn't probably as willing to do that as I am now.
Do you think they've noticed a change in you since you've stopped drinking?
Yeah, I suppose I didn't want to go down the road of, hey kids, here's what's happening. Here's me. Okay, everyone needs to sit around the table. Here's the crack. I think the way the kids speak nowadays, I said, oh, Dad's doing a challenge, no drink for a month challenge, and that kind of get them kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I did speak to my son. I know you spoke to me before about the first interaction with your son. Told my son what was happening on the first day of my sobriety, and he was fully aware. The kids have definitely seen a difference in me, but he himself has complimented the difference in me because he knew what I was doing. He's old enough to know. I suppose I woke up the Monday the 23rd of February, thinking, right, that's it, I'm done. And I said to him, because I just wanted him to know, listen, if you've noticed anything in me, just so you know it's changing. And he said to me on a Monday, he goes, yeah, I came down for a drink last night and I found you asleep on the sofa. And I was like, right, okay. I said to myself, I'm glad I spoke to him because I don't want that image being the norm for him or for any of the kids in the house. So they've definitely seen the difference in me that I'm more active. But then we were on a family cruise there a few weeks ago, back in May, and I obviously stayed sober throughout the whole thing. It was an all expenses paid holiday, free drink, the whole lot. And I think we're 2 days in, and my son says, "You're actually not drinking," and I says, "No, no, no." And he actually sat across the table. He says, "Proud of you, Dad." And I was just like, don't, where's the tissue? Where's the tissue? So it was a lovely moment. I'm definitely more present with them. I find myself that I'm having more crack with them. Other than my son saying things because he knows what I'm doing. The two girls, they're definitely they're seeing a difference in me, without having to say it. I see because they're coming back to me more and more. Can we do this? Can we do this? And they know it's a yes. Do you know what I mean? Just the silly dances in the kitchen kind of stuff, or yeah, okay, come on, let's go swimming. Or, of course we can go for that walk up in the woods. So yeah, definitely noticeable from them.
Yeah, when you get those little moments of gold, you're doing the right thing, and
Yeah,
all the hard work's worth it. And yeah, I spoke to so many dads who have said the same when they get when they get those small comments, and it might only be a few words, but it means the world. And yeah, it's an emotional roller coaster, and it's such a hard thing to do because you've been doing it for decades. Sometimes it's such a
yeah.
big change, but I think so many people underestimate how much their kids are watching because they take it all in, don't they?
Absolutely. Like my son, for example, he told me that this wasn't during this period of me being sober, but in the past, he has said to me that the friend group are aware of another father who drinks too much, and I just remember thinking, yeah, I don't want to be known as that. Do you know what I mean? For my sake and for his sake. Yeah. So like, it's definitely something that I wanted to. I knew that he was aware I was doing too much, and I wanted to include him in a small way to show, look, I'm actively doing this, and I want you to come on this journey. Not come on the journey with me, but just, you know, if you see goodness, say it to me, or let's do certain things. And we're actually going to the gym now, the two of us, a bit more. Now he goes with his mates more than anything, but like, there's definitely been that little bit of a connection where, because I've got more energy now, I'm definitely doing the gym more and walking more. So there is that level of communicate of like a friendship where, like, he's coming in, he's like, oh, worked out today, did my chest. What did you do today? You're like, I ran and I stretched or something like that. It was like the whole chest day, back day thing is well behind me with the gym. Like, I did a spinning class last week. I took me a few days to get over it. Like, but I do find there's little pockets of connection there now with me, with them as a whole, but then individually as well, for different things. Like, so that's just an amazing part of it.
It's amazing stuff. So
Yeah.
before you reached out, what was the story that you kept on telling yourself about why you couldn't change? What were those limiting beliefs that were holding you back? Or why didn't you think coaching was for you?
So just, if you remember, so I had gone off drink for a year and a half before. I have drank heavily for years. I'd say 2017, maybe 2018. And then COVID hit. Then I went off it for, I knew then I was pretty heavy on it. Like, so I went off for a year and a half from 21 to 22. Um, but there was something in it that when I went back on it, I got from January 23 onwards, I had attempted to come off a few times. You do a few weeks of drinking or a few months drinking, and then you think, no, I'm done now. You do a week or two or 3 or 4 weeks. I always kept going back to it. And in that period of time from January 23 up until I reached out to you earlier this year, I so many thoughts that I thought, You actually can't do it. You just can't do it this time." And I was heavily complimented the first time I did it by one guy who has been through recovery, and he said to me, he says, you've done this really well. Like, so many of us hit rock bottom, and we know rock bottom, and we know, right, we have to change. He says, you woke up one day and went, nah, this isn't for me. This isn't my life anymore. And you changed. And during the period of going back on the drink, I thought to myself, you're never going to get that again. Why can't you do it? And that's where the inner hate came. But then, like, that caught in the kind of cycle of drinking on, drinking off, heavily drinking on. I suppose I tried to rationalize it and say, look, if you just moderate it, you'd be all right. Okay, the evidence shows alcohol is poison. You're ingesting poison all the time. Listen to enough podcasts there to know, and read enough. And funny, I'll give you a very funny one, which I don't know if we ever touched on before. I did a degree there in health and safety from 2023 to the end of 2025, and my thesis topic was exploring the impact of alcohol consumption on workplace safety and productivity. I was literally trying to research myself in this topic, and literally safety and productivity. And it came from the fact that I'd gone out one Sunday with one of the dads and two kids because there was a match on the local. Didn't drink at the whole thing, but then I think 6 o'clock we had a few drinks in the pub. And I got back into a few drinks. I could not function the whole day. I mentioned earlier on about productivity not being great. I couldn't function a single minute throughout that day and the Monday. I text one of the lads I'm working. I told him I'm really bad. Make sure no one comes near me. But then I sat there and I said to myself, "Well, you're working from home today. You can't do a thing. You can't even move your hands on the keyboard. Imagine." And I put myself in a situation when I used to be on the road driving vans. I said to myself, "Would you have gone out to work today if you were like this, or just stay at home? Like, you're not fit for work. You're technically sick today. Like, your body is sick based on what you did last night." Um, so there was lots of situations there over the 3 years where I try pull myself back. I'd get to the point where I thought, you just can't do it. So you might as well just moderate, you know? So moderating, what's that? It doesn't exist for some of us. So I think I just got to the point where as I said earlier on, I had massive inner hate. My health and fitness wasn't where I wanted it. I was doing regular visits to the GP for blood work because if you had passed away in my family, and my cholesterol was going up and up and up every time. Like, the GP would say, it's only slightly up. It's only slightly up. But I was like, we'll look back at all those slightlys and add them up and let's see where we're at. Like, and so it was one of those things where I was like, right, you said you're going to moderate it. You're falling between trying to moderate it and hating yourself. And nobody's winning here. You're not winning. Your family's definitely not winning. Your wife's not winning. Your kids aren't winning. And from December into February there, I had looked into moving jobs just fancy the change. And I knew I was going into a company that would open up so many doors for me professionally. And those doors, literally would be walking in, would hold in the hands of my family. And I said to myself, right, you've got it. I felt like I said to myself, you've got away with it for a while. Now you need to cop on. Okay, you're an adult now. Cop on to yourself. And this is not good for you physically and mentally. You are hating yourself. You need to stop. I think I did say to you one time, like the previous role, I carried out health and safety investigations. And, in any investigation, you try to get to the root cause of the incident. And I essentially done like a root cause on myself, so your physical fitness isn't where you want it to be. Your mental fitness, I listed all these 5 or 6 things, and if you ask yourself why 4 or 5 times, you'll get to the root cause. And every time I did it, alcohol was at the end, so I just said to myself, right, you need to stop. But it always just seemed harder. It seemed easier than I thought it was. But then I remember one Sunday, literally went to the shop, you know, had the drink going into the car, and I just said to my wife, "That's it, I'm done. I'm done after tonight now." And she was like, "Well, put it back. Don't get it, like." And I was just like, I don't know if it was just one more hurrah, like, but I went home with a fair bit of drink, saying, "You're done now tomorrow. Don't start. You're done." And I literally texted you the next morning or emailed and I said, "Look, I really need help here." It was a miserable Monday morning, and I said, I'm done. I have to be done now for so many reasons. This is it. It's done." And I don't know. A switch just flicked, and then chatting to you, I started to absorb more content online around sobriety. Because I felt like beforehand I did do it myself. But this time around I just felt like I needed a helping hand. Absorbing content is brilliant, your own content and some others as well. And I did come across you because you were on a different podcast, and I remember hearing your story. I think it was Olivia, the grey area drinker. And I literally was like, right, that guy sounds like me. I need to get in touch with this guy. Like, and I remember when we first spoke, the first consultation call, like, I walked down the stairs beaming, like, and my wife was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, this seems like my guy. This is, I'm happy with this." Like, and yeah, I think just a switch just went, and it was like, "You're done now," So yeah, I think that was pretty much it. Hope that answers that question. I kind of rambled on a bit there.
My next question was actually going to be about your rock bottom moment, but it sounds like there was a series of them.
Mm,
Not really rock bottom moments, but a series of realizations, a series of like, you can't keep on going on like this, and you just got sick and
yeah,
tired.
it's like obviously rock bottom. We've hit the bottom, right? It's at the, there's no, you feel like there's no further you can go. literally just thought of an analogy there. The flip of that. If you remember the episode of The Simpsons years ago, where Homer was trying to climb a mountain. Do you remember that one? Do you think of that one?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
like Homer was
Mate.
trying to climb this, a couple of Sherpas with him, and he was like, "Oh, there it is." And they're like, "No, no, it's there. No, no, it's there." So rather than rock bottom, it's like I just kept hitting something and then hitting something. Rather than going, I was hitting the bottom, hitting the bottom. It's like a false bottom nearly. Do you know what I mean? And every time it was like, yeah, no, that was a bad night. Stop that now. Or, yeah, hated the idea that the kids might walk down and find me asleep on the sofa, so yeah, it's nearly maybe it was a series of rock bottoms. It was rather than bang rock bottom, it was like I was constantly tumbling down the hill, So thankfully that's done now.
So you started working with me, Brian. What was the hardest part of that, and how did you get through it?
I suppose like I am an open book. Like I'll tell anyone anything. I've told a lot of people what I'm doing now, and even recently in my new job. Um, I think the first few days where I started journaling again. I'd write things down, how I was feeling. Um, Literally wrote down 2 or 3 pages of notepad about how I was feeling. I think although I knew things were bad, it was only when I looked really, really deep inside to myself and said, right, what's happening? What's going on? Um, I suppose accepting where I was, although I thought, you're grand, you're not that bad. When I wrote down where I was in February this year compared to where I was in 21, 22 when I was off everything for a long time, um, and where I wanted to be, I was so far away from it. And I think the accepting the realization of the damage I had done during that period of drinking, where, as I said, physically, I put on 3 stone in the last 3 years. Disgusted at myself at that. Um, you know, I felt like a failure because I had done so well in the year and a half being off it, and I felt like I was a rock star. I think I used that word before. I felt like a rock star. I felt like I could do so much, in that year and a half I was off it. To then go from that to back to where I was to potentially even worse. Um, Accepting it and writing it down, and I think I'd have to dig out the notes there. I think I did say you failed, and accepting that I failed. But then at the cop on, then, as the days and weeks go on, I crossed off the word failure. I was like, look, stop, don't be so hard. You didn't fail. I think someone says you just learned to do it a different way, So I think what was hard was accepting that I had done what I did and then saying, right, you need to put a plan in place now. You need to go back to where you were. If it took you 3 years to damage this, it may take that to go back to where you want to be. If depending on how you do it. So yeah, I think accepting what I'd done was hard, realizing what I'd done was hard, and then just putting a plan in place. Then, but look, as hard as it may have been, great support from my family and my wife. So, what may have been hard has been actually a bit easier than I thought. You know what I mean?
I think the first step is radical honesty. I
Yeah.
always say it to everyone, and journaling does really, really help with that when you put pen to paper.
Mm.
But it's accepting it and moving on. So many of the people that I work with, they go sober and they sort of hit that pink cloud and they feel great, but then all of a sudden they feel so much guilt and shame because they feel guilty for all the stuff that they've done in the past, and
Mm.
they keep on looking back, and I find this with so many of my clients. But it's accepting what's happened in the past, but moving forward. And obviously, it could be a hell of a lot worse. You could still be stuck back there doing the same thing on repeat in those loops that you spoke about earlier. But it's
Yeah.
accepting, moving on. It's a very important part, I think.
Yeah. I think the difficulties that I had, or that someone may experience when they first come off drink, I felt it the first time I come off the drink. And the anxiety I went through the first time I come off it was pretty horrendous. I was Googling anything and everything, am I an alcoholic? Am I this? Am I that? I'd be running things, I'd be saying to myself, look at this, I'm at the Googling this is me. And she even was said, look, why do you feel the need to put a label on this? Like, just do you, like. So I think I went through the massive anxiety and the fear and the annoyance at myself the first time I went around it. Took me a lot longer to get out of that back then. So this time, although I did go through similar, I I probably had the benefit this time round of, rather than hoping I felt better. A lot of approaches can be 28 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. I found myself writing in a journal saying, when I hit 30 days the first time I felt like this, I can't wait to feel that again. When I hit 60 days, I felt like this, I can't wait to hit that again. You know, so I went from, bet you can't even do 7 days, look at you. You know what I mean? To then going, I can't wait to feel 80 or 80 days, 90 days, so on. Like, so I think a lot of the real, real deep hardship came from the first time I come off it. And then obviously this time I did go through stuff. It was hard, but made a little bit easier by having yourself there in my corner, checking in and stuff like that. And the few calls there at the start where, certain tools, and you're asking me to ask questions of myself. Um, that, if I had that tool maybe the first time around, I might have found it as hard. But having those tools there this time around was made the impact not easier. It was a little bit more bearable, but still very, very difficult.
So, not just as a sober person, but as a dad, what do your kids get now from you that they didn't before? You've mentioned a few things already, but what else springs to mind?
Definitely a lot more clarity, a lot more understanding, um, a lot more patience. Like my daughter's gone through a difficult time there. I was saying to you there before Christmas, and some stuff has crept up again recently. And I just found that I'm able to sit with her more and be present and outline why bad things happen and why, if you stick to your values, good things will happen and things like that. Um, and then say with my son, he's in second year, just finished second year in secondary school here, and he's already thinking about his junior cert result, his junior cert and his leaving cert. I can't remember the equivalent. Is it GCSEs and A levels
Yeah,
in
that's right.
England?
GCSE data. Yeah.
So like, he's already thinking about these things, and it's a big jump from primary to secondary school. So I'm able to sit there and bring him through certain stages of exams and studying and so on, and give him tips and things like that. Whereas, before, now look, I can't say for certainty, but before I may not have been, as good with those sort of things. But I definitely find I can rationalize things a lot better now. Like, definitely something comes in, an external threat, say, comes into the family for any, either job stress or work, school stress or whatever, for any of us. I find I'm definitely a lot more rational, that I can bring it in, break it down, and then go back to either my wife or the kids or whatever. I think when we start working together, my wife had just started a college course, and it was very, very different to her. She hadn't done a course in a long, long time. So I have done courses over the years. So I was able to help her with just setting a plan and putting a plan in place for herself for studying. But I found I was very, very happy to do that, very willing, and that I had more time to be present for her, to help her. So I think definitely they've all experienced something from me now when they needed it, be it school, college, or something that they're going through.
A lot of dads worry that they're going to lose their mates or they're going to become quote unquote boring if they quit.
Yeah.
What is your on it? Like, what is your honest take on that, Brian?
I do get where they're coming from. Like last year, I was supposed to go to it was the rugby championships. Used to be called the Heineken Cup. I think it was in the Principality in Wales last year, and I was in a moment where I just didn't want to drink and I didn't want to be around people, so I ended up bailing. Although I paid money for the flights and all that, I bailed, didn't go. Um, I think on the back of that, then I did worry and fear, like, there so many things do revolve around drink. Again, I had to remind myself of what was like the first time, where my first time off the drink. I did two family weddings, and a family holiday. Now one wedding was my best mate's wedding, and it was party central, like, but I didn't touch a drink. What I'd say to them is, don't worry about it. At the end of the day, you need to put yourself first, for what you need to change. You do you for the moment. Anything else is external. If you lose friends because you're no longer drinking, I probably wouldn't have called them friends to begin with. Um, your best mates would be there for you. Look, there are zero beers and stuff like that out there. But like I've got a WhatsApp group of two friends there, and we literally, I think we changed it from, I think before the group chat was called Pints 2.0 to, it's now called Brunch Boys, because we've arranged to go for lunch now soon or something like that, Now look, I've gone to pubs. I was at work there last week in a hotel for 2 days, where drink was flowing and stuff like that. It wasn't an issue for me, but I wouldn't worry about. Look, if you're if you're at the beginning of this journey and you're worrying about losing friends, I wouldn't. I really, really wouldn't. Look, that's something for down the road. For the moment, you need to just do day one, focus on day by day, get to day 7, get to day 14, so on, so on. At some point in after a few weeks have gone by, because the anxiety and fear hits you within those first few weeks. In those first few weeks, you just need to look after yourself. And obviously, if you've family around you, look after them. But you need to look after you. Don't be worrying about your friends for the moment. Once that anxiety settles and if the fog clears and you can think a bit more rational, if you feel you want to let your friends know what you're doing, throw something into a WhatsApp group or message one or two privately and say to them, listen, now look, it may take a while before you get to this point, but say to them, lads, look, do not leave me over night out. I'll go out, I'll have a beer or whatever, like or non-alcoholic beer, sorry. Like one of the weddings I went to there a couple of years ago, like, I mean, I think it was day 2 of the wedding, 11 o'clock at night, everyone was a few drinks in and the waiter was going around, I says, can I get a cup of tea, please? And my wife looked messing going, you can't drink tea unless you have biscuits. I went, oh, can I get biscuits as well, please? and there's everyone, a few drinks and a few shots in, like, like I personally, like I've done so much just in the last 115 days around that drink has been around me. Now look, some may find that more difficult than I have. Like my friend here whose wedding that I mentioned a couple of years ago, I went to his wedding very easily, but I didn't go to his stag's. His stag was in Spain for 2 nights, and I just look, that's something I just can't do. I didn't fear that I'd crumble and drink. I just said I just don't need that for the moment. 2 nights in Spain as I'm going through this just sounded like hell. It turns out it was a session of a 2 nights. Look after yourself first. Is my main message. Literally take those first few days, do a bit of journaling, get out for walks. The weather we have there now, well, depending on where you are in Ireland, is good. Your mates will be there. If they're your true friends, they'll be there. They'll completely understand. They will help you out when needed. Like that wedding, my mate's wedding that time, there was lads there from school that I hadn't seen in 20 years, like, and one or two were a little awkward around me. And I said, look, it's fine. And then one lad had a few drinks on him. He's so sound. He says, he's a few on him, like, and he says, look at you drink. Do you want a drink? Do you want, I think he copped down. He goes, do you want lemonade or something? And I was like, no, you're grand. I says, look, it doesn't go from drinking to just a lemonade. I says, I'm fine. Honestly, you're grand, like, But then, look, one or two can be awkward around it. And they need to know, listen, don't be tiptoeing around me. It's absolutely fine. I wouldn't be out on this night if I didn't think if I could handle it, Just look after yourself is the first thing, the main thing, Your friends will be there, your true friends will be there. If someone walks away from you, look, if you find out that you've been removed from or a separate group chat's been set up, by 2 or 3 because, like, sure, he doesn't drink anyway, that's poor form on them. And that says more about them than it does about you. You want to be included in the arrangement of these nights out. You then choose not to go. You know what I mean? Like, I know you went to a stag's there a few weeks ago. these things are doable. You can have so much fun. Like I've done plenty of nights out where I've said, right lads, I'm done now. 11 o'clock, I'm done. We worked there a few years ago when I was off for the first time. I this could sound a little bit sad to some people. I drove up to Dublin, and on the way back, I went in to get a cup of tea and a bar of chocolate, and I was giddy about the fact that I'm going home on a Friday night with a cup of tea and a bar of chocolate. You know what I mean? But I think the buzz that I got was more from the fact that I'm getting up on Saturday and it's cool. It's all good. Do you know what I mean? So look, to go back to it again, I'm repeating myself here. Just look after yourself for the first few weeks. At some point, whenever you want to bring people into the fold one by one, you don't need to make an announcement on social media. There are, obviously supports there with Luke, and there are other, I know there's online communities and stuff like that, to chat to people, but include one friend maybe here and there, and then tell people more and more, but look after yourself is my main message there.
You mentioned the stag do just then. It was quite funny. One of the nights, a really good friend of mine come up to me, and he had a cup of tea as well. There was actually two guys. There was a group of 20 of us, and there was two guys. And yeah, he had this cup of tea. And I said, you're drinking a cup of tea. And he said, it's brilliant having you here now, Luke. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, it gives the people that don't really like drinking the excuse not to carry on and drink with everyone else. And that really hit me. I was like, oh
Yeah.
my God, wow. Because how many of us, especially blokes in big groups, how many of us are just led, and how many of us give into that peer pressure because we want to be part of the group, don't we? And yeah, they said, now that I'm sober, they don't feel bad by opting out. I mean, they can still go, they can have a couple of drinks, but they haven't got to stay up all night, and they haven't got to plow on through with everyone else. But yeah, it was like, wow, so many people in the world are drinking because they want to feel part of the group and they don't want to be isolated.
That's it. And look, it just takes one person like you to do it, and it makes someone feel that little bit better about it. Now it can have the complete opposite effect, where somebody knows deep down they're doing too much, and they nearly resent you for doing what you're doing because they feel it shows them in a bad light. But the same message as before to the dads, that's on them. You know what I mean? You do you and look after you. Like I've definitely gone I've definitely gone to a point now where I'm very giddy, nearly like smug giddiness that, "Oh, I'm going to bed early because I'm getting up early." You know what I mean? And that just brings me on to something we mentioned there earlier on, like my lack of podcast absorption lately is so the first few weeks of me going off to drink this time, like that, as you know yourself, your body clock just sets back to where it should be. So I just start waking between 5 and 6 most mornings, and I just said, right, I'm gonna go back to the gym now. I've been doing bits of the gym, but I just found myself going either for walks or the gym. And I said to my wife, I says, "Oh, I know you'd never do it, as in that early." I said, "But the gym at 6 is amazing." I said, "You'd love it." And she goes, "Right, I'm doing it in the morning." I was like, "Yeah, okay." She'd never be up that early, like, and so she did. She walked into the gym with me the next morning at 6:10. Two of us were open out the door. I thought this is great, and we walked out, and it was February. Yeah, February, late February into March. So spring, the spring mornings were really, really coming in. Lovely, lovely mornings. And we walked out of the gym. I said, "Oh, do you know what? It's nearly a pity to go into the gym when you see a morning like that. We should really be out walking." And then we started doing a few walks in the mornings. And then she says, "Do you know what? You go to the gym, I'm going to go for a walk." I was like, "I know, I'll walk with you." So we've walked nearly every morning since the end of February, beginning of March, every morning at 6 a.m. Between 6 and a half, 6 to 2 was up, out the door, set the alarms, we're gone. So beforehand, when I'd walk on my own, I'd put the earphones in, I'd listen to all the podcasts that I like listening to. And it's not a bad thing, but it's funny that like I'm way behind on my podcasts because I'm up out for early walks with my wife. Do you know what I mean? And it's that in itself is a metric of where I've come and where the house has come. Do you know what I mean? Because she wouldn't mind me saying, like, couples rub off each other, so if I was drinking heavily chances are she was doing a bit more than she would have liked. With me stopping, all of a sudden hers has gone down to near nothing, and times she might buy a bottle of wine and it's there a week later. Do you know what I mean? After one glass, like. So she found herself, she's roaring with energy now, a couple of times now with me at work lately, my the 6 o'clock isn't as springy as it was, but there's times I wake up and she's like, "Are you going?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." Well, I am. I'm like, "Oh, hang on, I'm going as well." It's nearly shaming me. Like, so there's times I go into Spotify. If I'm in the gym now, I'll see podcasts. I'm like, don't listen to a podcast in the gym, but I'm way behind on podcast episodes. And the reason being is not a bad reason, So that's just one thing I thought was good from all this.
It's the ripple effect, and that being that positive role model in the family is
Mm,
going to filter out to your partner, and it's obviously going to feed down to your kids as well.
yeah.
Brilliant stuff. So my last question, Brian, was the investment worth it? And be honest, because I know a lot of dads listening will be thinking that they don't want to pay for coaching and they think that they can do it alone. So what would you say to them?
I think it's definitely worth it. It's look, some people are built with massive willpower, and can just flick a switch and they're done. And even though, so I did do that to a degree myself the first time round. I did flick a switch and I did go off it, but I felt like looking back now, I probably didn't deal with things as in my reasons for drinking. I did just go off it one day, and that was the end of it, or so I thought. I didn't deal with the reasons behind my drinking, which is where I feel you come in, and with your weekly kind of homework and stuff like that. I think that allows, like, that. I hadn't journaled really before. Getting in touch with yourself, and I found just writing stuff down was amazing. So I think, even look, you can Google these things, tips for sobriety, or I'm sure you can AI it and it'll give you a plan. It'll give you 28, 38, or 34, whatever days plan. It's all well and good. You can Google these things, but to have someone there, I remember listening to a podcast years ago. I can't remember what the name of it was, but the guy being interviewed very nonchalantly just dropped in the fact that he was seeing a therapist. And the guy says, "Oh, hang on, fair play to you for saying that." Like, now this was good 2 years ago. And I said, "Just fair play to you for saying that. Like, that's very brave of you." And he says, "Well, to me, a therapist is like, I'll go to a PT and say, 'Here, can you get me ripped?' And I'll proudly say, 'Hey, I go to a PT and he's getting me ripped.' Why wouldn't I go to a therapist?" He says, "The therapist is my PT for my brain." And that's where I see yourself in that, kind of bracket of help and coaching. Like, if there's a part of your life you're not happy, why wouldn't you get help with it? Yeah, you can confide in a friend and say, "Listen, I want to try this thing. Will you help me out?" Like, but I think the investment is definitely worth it. There's tips and tricks and tools there with yourself. Definitely the weekly homework, questions, and getting you to look into yourself. And, I think, again, that probably helped me a little bit more with anxiety this time around. The questions you give the first couple of nights there, where it's forcing me to have to look into myself and see, right, you're feeling this, why are you feeling this, and what's this trigger? Whereas if you don't have that coaching element, you're sitting there, and the thoughts are running around, and you don't know how to rationalize them. It's like going around the roundabout constantly, without any exit. Whereas, like, rather than sitting there with that going around, round, 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 if you are sitting there, you might find yourself thinking, "Oh, that question Luke had in that workbook there, that's like your little off ramp from the spinning wheel in your head, like, and I think that's where coaching is key. And then obviously with yourself, then we'd be chatting through WhatsApp, and I remember sending you pictures from the woods I was walking in and things like that. And, you'd be checking in, every couple of days and things like that in between calls and stuff. It's definitely worth it, is my answer to that. Like, I know there's AA out there, but I've never been to one, but you can't beat the coaching one-to-one personal element.
I think so many people try to do it on willpower, and a lot of people
Yeah.
do, and you probably did yourself back in the day. But I think having a coach, obviously, there's so many tools and techniques that you can implement through a coach, but it's having that accountability as well. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, accountability is definitely a big one. I think if you try to do it by willpower and you're not at that place yet yourself, you'll definitely rationalize having, sure, look, it's just four, like, I'll just have four on the Friday, be grand. Um, and it's never four. It's never just a Friday. Um, like I've gone. Now I didn't. I obviously, my wife and kids knew. One or two friends knew that I was actively trying to get away from it again this time. And I found myself very quickly going from saying I'm trying to go off drink to then saying I don't drink. And I remember the time I remember that shift in my brain. It was a few weeks in, probably 6 weeks in, that if anyone asked me anything, I'd say I'm trying to stay off the drink. To then going, oh, I don't drink. Like the work deal was at there last week. It was a 2-day conference. Stayed in the hotel, barbecue, drink, the whole shebang. Like, and I went up to the bar and just asked for a Heineken Zero, and the guy says, "Oh, that's you have to go into the other bar for that." I felt a little bit excluded, going, you know, not only am I on the zero, but let's go walk elsewhere to get it. Like, but it was grand. I walked in, and there was one of the guys from work standing there beside me, like, and he was just on the night he was just not doing a whole lot, like, but like that I didn't need anyone, but it was nice to chat to him. I ended up just saying to him, I don't drink anymore. I said that's why I'm having this, like. And then as the night went on, yourself, the glasses look the same. It might have zero on it, doesn't matter. Who cares? The only thing was once or twice someone would say, "Will I get you a drink?" And I'm like, "Well, you have to go to the other bar, so I'll go get it." You know what I mean? Like, thanks very much. And then just one of the women, as I was chatting to her, she turned around and I think she copped the glass, had 0-0. And she says, "Oh, why aren't you drinking tonight?" And I says, "Oh, well, I don't drink." Now we were at something there a few weeks ago. She probably never copped that. I had 0 as well, and it wasn't, "Oh, I'm trying to stay off the drink," or "I'm giving it a go," or "Oh, I've been off for X amount of weeks now. I want to continue." I just went, "I don't drink." Full stop. And she just said, "Jesus, aren't you?" I think she used the word "find." "Aren't you a find?" I was like, "Thanks, I think." So, and as I chatted to another girl there yesterday in work, we're joking about the football syndicate thing that I was saying to you earlier on. And I said, "Yeah," I said, "Maybe I'm a bit of a catch." I said, "I don't drink, I don't follow football, I don't play PlayStation." I said, "I'm ticking a few boxes there, but I am spoken for."
Yeah, I think it's a big shift in your identity when you do just say, plain as day, I don't drink. There's not,
Yeah.
there's no buts. I think it's a sort of line in the sand moment. It's a sort of, that's it.
Yeah, and it's actually the funny what I was saying to you there. We were on a cruise there a few weeks ago. We were back from the cruise very late at night, and then we had our daughter's communion the next morning. You couldn't have planned. Well, we did plan it, but the dates were mental. But I only got 4 hours sleep after all the traveling we did. 4 hours sleep, then up for the communion, and we reserved an area. We knew months ago the time would be shocking and we would be wrecked. So we didn't have a party in the house. We reserved an area in one of the local pubs. They have an outdoor area, and both sides of our family were there, and everyone knew I was on zeros and stuff. I was having Guinness Zero, and about 6 o'clock, the tiredness hit me so much. Like, I've never felt exhaustion like it. That I felt drunk, and I was holding the Guinness Zero. I looked at it. No, I got them myself. Like, I saw it coming out of that Guinness Zero tap, but then I was doubting it. And I was like, did they put the wrong keg in? I was starting to panic then. But then it was just, look, there was a few things. It was warm and obviously sleep deprived and all that. I went outside, got a bit of fresh air. And I was right as rain. But I was freaked out and I panicked a little bit, thinking, oh, if it started at day 0 now tomorrow and it wasn't my fault, you know what I mean? Do I sue this pub for what they're after doing to me, like? And I was happened to say it to my dad, like, and he goes, "No, that's definitely 0. I made sure it was 0 for you." And that I was like, "Oh, he made sure he got me 0." You know what I mean? And that I thought, and he knew I was off it. Like, for a couple of times we were up in their house or we were somewhere. He knew I had zeros and stuff, and I did tell him I'm X amount of weeks off or whatever. Told him about the cholesterol, that I was happy to be off, and here's what I'm doing. So yeah, for him to say, "No, I made sure it was a zero," I thought, "Oh, everyone's in my corner here now," and which I thought was nice. Whereas like in the past, someone was offering me prosecco one time at a wedding, and I said, "No, you're fine, thanks." I'll go on, you can have one. I'm like, I don't want one. You know what I mean? So to then hear my dad, who was like, "No, no, I made sure that was a zero." You're like, "Oh, thanks, I love that."
People were taking you seriously and they knew that you meant business, and that was it.
Yeah, and then I suppose I know I don't want to keep you too long, but like I remember when I was off the first time, every now and again I check in my wife and go, "Did you tell your family I'm off it?" And she's like, "Oh no, sure, it's not one's business." I'm like, "Okay." And then I'd ask, "Did you tell your mom, tell your dad?" "No, no one's business." And then I remember thinking, was she afraid to tell people? Because then she may have to say, "Well, here's why he's off it, because he was doing all this." And in a way, was she trying to protect me from anyone judging me? And I totally get that, and I appreciate and I love that. As I said, I'm an open book, and I always have been. But then the flip side of that, then we were away with my wife's family, on holiday there on the cruise, like, and there was a couple of nights where say we'd have dinner, one or two drinks with people, and I'd say, "Look, I'm gonna bring the kids to the pool or whatever. You stay with your parents and have a drink and stuff like that." And the next day she'd tell me that her mother and father were full of praise for what I was doing. Her dad had just wondered, like, how was he off it? Like, and he just doesn't want to be on it anymore. He feels he's a better person without it. He knows he's more present with the kids. She gave a few examples. And I think he asked, "Well, when did he know, or what was the story?" And she was, "Well, look, a couple of years ago during COVID, all that kind of stuff." And they both just said, "You know what, fair play to him. He's dead right." Yeah, a couple of people they know had done it, in their local pub and stuff like that. But they were full of praise. And I think, look, I love that my father was looking after me there, making sure it was a zero. But I think there's nearly a nicer recognition when your in-laws appreciate what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because
Yeah.
she went into a bit of detail that night, and without them saying it, I know that they're thinking, right, this guy's doing this because he loves our daughter and our grandkids. And I've got a lot of praise here and there, but that was just something I just kind of grabbed and I was like, right, I'm having that. Do you know what I mean? I was like, I'm loving this, like, and then there was like my mother-in-law had said something herself about going, "Joe, I do love a zero. I might have a zero and all that." And then like we were looking through the mocktail list and things like that. Do you know what I mean? And there's always those lovely little moments that you're like, "Yeah, I'm gonna take them. I'll cherish them." So I think to look, I'm 22 years with my wife. Like I think the and then obviously the day of the wedding, the father hands her over and all that. But the way they expressed um their joy for what I was doing was nearly like another, "Okay, you got this," and I was like, "Yeah, I love that. I'll take that."
Yeah, those moments make it all worthwhile. They really, really
Yeah.
do. So, listening to Brian's story, you know what is possible when someone decides that he's done with alcohol and he's done with alcohol calling all the shots. Now, it's not going to be easy. As Brian said, there's going to be tough days, but what he's showing us is that on the other side of discomfort, there is a version of you that your kids are actually going to grow with. So if you're a dad and you're fed up with that same old cycle, that loop that we've been speaking about here today, and you're ready to do something about it, then if you want to have that conversation, then just drop me a DM and we'll talk about what a program could look like for you. A massive, massive thank you to Brian for coming on today, for being so open and honest, mate. I really, really appreciate your time. It's taken a lot of courage to come on here today. You didn't have to do it. So thank you so much, mate, because I know that there will be other dads out there listening to this and they'll resonate with so much of what you said.
No, thanks very much for having me, Luke. As I said, the first time I heard you on Olivia's podcast, I knew I had to reach out to you. I had messaged Olivia at the time just for a few tips and tricks, bit of advice, but I knew getting in touch with yourself would do something. Now I know we kind of chatted through Instagram a bit before I committed to the coaching, and that was more on my part. But I definitely feel getting in touch with you helped me to get to where I am today. For that, I say thank you, and there's a massive thank you from my family as well. So anytime to chat, absolutely, I'll be there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Brian.
No worries. Thanks very much.